My why is to inspire people to do the things that inspire them. So together, each of us can change our world for the better. And it's why I wake up every morning, every day. It is the greatest compliment someone can pay me when they say to me, that was inspiring, or you were inspiring. Like, that feeds me, you know? And the interesting thing about a why is because it is objective. A why is the sum total of how we were raised. It's born out of the patterns and the lessons we learned from our parents, from our teachers when we're young. And our why is fully formed by the time we're in our mid to late teens. And you only have one why for the rest of your life. It doesn't change. You are who you are based on how you were raised. Now, you may not be acting as your true self. You know, people say that to us all the time, you know. It's like, I don't know who you are anymore, you know. But when you are at your natural best, your why is front and center. But we're not always acting at our natural best. And sometimes we make decisions out of selfishness. We take the job that pays us, that offers us the most money, and turn down the one to work for somebody who would probably be a better mentor. You know, we do these things all the time. And so, you know, can you tweak the words of your why? Of course, you know, but that's semantics. Can we find better ways to bring a why to life? Yes, that's the evolution. But the why itself is fixed.
When you talk about the why being influenced by the things that happened in our life, our experiences, our upbringing, does that mean that our trauma can influence our why for better or for worse?
Always for better.
Always for better?
Yeah, a why is always positive. And I'll give you a real life example of somebody's why discovery that I did. And, you know, one of the things I do when I do somebody's why discovery, I ask them about, you know, happy experiences when they were kids. And this person said, I didn't have a very happy childhood. I had a really bad childhood. And I said, okay, so tell me a bad memory then, you know? And she talked about a lot of abuse in the household and a very abusive alcoholic father who would beat her mother and the kids. And she told a story of a repeated pattern of when the father would be drunk and come looking for the kids, that she'd be hiding in the cupboard, protecting her brother with her arms wrapped around him so to shield her brother. And she goes through this whole story, and at the end, I pointed out to her that she's a protector, that in these traumatic experiences, it was her instinct to protect her baby brother, and she's lived her life. If you look at all of the times that she's really thrived and where she's her best self, she's usually in a position of protection of other people, and that's where she finds joy in taking care of other people. And so the experiences mold us into who we are, and the effects, you know, the impact will be positive regardless of where it comes from. So yeah, I mean, a horrible childhood that made her a wonderful human being.
I was going to use me as an example there to try and rebuttal that somewhat, but I remember having a very similar conversation with a very good friend of mine a week ago upstairs who talked to me about their childhood. They've talked about this publicly as well, so I'm not letting the cat out of the bag, but their father used to beat their mother up really, really severely. And she was telling me literally just a few days ago upstairs that her memories of trying to hold on to her dad's arm as it swung for her mother when she was 5 years old. And when you look at the pattern of what those early experiences have caused and a few other experiences, she's obsessed with helping others, and she's, you know, building these amazing businesses. She's unbelievably successful. It's like frighteningly successful at a very, very young age. However, that force in her to help others has meant that she's compromised sometimes helping herself. And of everyone I know in my life, she is the most successful woman I know, but she's also the woman that is most unsuccessful in all of the personal aspects. Relationships, boyfriend, mental health, all of these things. So when we say, you know, I understand the positive side of it, but the negative side of it seems to be of this unbelievable, I guess, why she's got seems to just, honestly, for me, not be worth it. Because this is not someone that would say they're happy. This is someone that is in therapy and is every day in tears and upset while serving the world in an unbelievable way. So is that a positive? Is that a positive why?
So the rub about the why, you know, a why is basically the thing we give to the world. It's the value we have in other people's lives. Her friends would say of her that she is our protector. You know, that is the role we fill in their lives, which is why they love us, because we're giving them our why. It is our value. The rub, the most difficult thing about the why to understand is the thing that we give to the world is also the thing that we need the most. It's always balanced. And so I would argue that, she it's not that she's unable to take care of herself. It's that she needs to find friends, colleagues, whatever it is, who are committed to taking care of her. And that's where the change happens. And, we were talking about this, before the show started. There's an entire section in the bookshop called Self-Help, and there's no section in the bookshop called Help Others. And I believe what we need is the Help Others industry. I'll tell you something that happened to me. A friend of mine was going through a really rough patch in her life. Her marriage was struggling. Her career was struggling. She was unhappy. Like, just none of the boxes were getting checked, And she knows what I do. I mean, we've been friends for forever. And she asked a favor. Can you help me? Of course, I said. And every week we had a standing 90-minute meeting where she'd come over and she would tell me what's going on. And I would give her some advice and I'd point out some patterns. And she'd feel fantastic. She would leave on a high and she'd feel amazing for like 2 days. And then it would go right back again. And she'd come back the following week. And this went on for months, 2 days, 3 days, and then back down again, right? And then it occurred to me, I remembered my own work. In Leaders Eat Last, I talk about Alcoholics Anonymous, where they have 12 steps to help an alcoholic beat this disease. And Alcoholics Anonymous knows that if you master 11 of the 12 steps, you're going to probably slide back and succumb to the disease. But if you can master the 12th step as well, you will more likely beat the disease. The 12th step is to help another alcoholic. It's service. And so I remembered my own work and I decided to change things up, right? And so I said to her, look, I love that you come and see me every week and I love helping you every week. But I struggle with things too and I don't have anybody to talk to. Would you be willing to help me? Maybe we can split the time. And she said, of course, yes. And what started to happen is every week we got together and it was genuine. I wasn't faking it. Like, I would unload and tell her what I was going through and what I was struggling with. And it ended up that we wouldn't split the time. It ended up that we'd spend 90 minutes talking about my stuff, right? And she was the advice giver and she was the one looking for the patterns. And she would leave on a high and that high would stay until the following week. It was only when we reversed the scenario where that she had the opportunity to take care of someone she loved that she was able to find the solutions to her own challenges. And I'm a great believer that we have to remember we're social animals. We need each other. And this is the great paradox of being human. At every moment of every day, we are both individuals and members of groups. And there's a debate. Do you take care of yourself first or do you take care of others first? And there's a whole school of thought that says you have to take care of yourself first because if you're not healthy, you can't take care of others. And there's a whole school of thought that says, no, you have to take care of others first so that when you're in need, they'll be there for you. And the answer is you're both right and you're both wrong. It's a paradox. It's a struggle. And every day we're faced with sometimes big, but often small choices. Do I prioritize myself at the sacrifice of the group or do I prioritize the group at the sacrifice of myself? And, folks like Maslow, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maslow made a huge mistake in that hierarchy, which is his baseline, our basic need is food and shelter, right? I've never heard of anyone dying by suicide because they were hungry. I've heard of people dying by suicide because they were lonely, right? And yet social relationships in Maslow's hierarchy is number 3. But that doesn't sound right. It seems like there's something more important to human beings than just food and shelter. And then the top of the peak is self-actualization, which sounds the most selfish thing in the world. Like, I am so self-actualized that I would literally sit on top of a pyramid and look down at all of you unactualized people, because that's my goal, to be self-actualized. He's half right. The mistake that Maslow made, he's only thought of us as individuals. And as individuals, yes, I need food and shelter first. But as a member of a group, I need friends and I need love. And self-actualization is not the thing I'm actually in pursuit of as a member of a group. It's shared actualization that I'm looking for. And unfortunately, for various reasons, which we don't have to go down that rabbit hole, the past 30, 40 years, especially in the West, we have doubled down on individualism. We have doubled down on my own career. We've doubled down at how do I find love? How do I find happiness? We've doubled down on selfishness. And it worked for a while. It worked when the economy was really good. Like in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, it's awesome. Selfishness was great because it worked. But now in a complicated, messy world where the economy isn't great and everything's not roses, all that self-interest is now not working, except we haven't been practicing and developing the skills of taking care of each other. And that's what we need now more than ever. And so I don't know your friend, and so I can't make any conclusions. But we are animals in balance, right? And nature abhors a vacuum. And so whenever I hear about these things, my question is always about the balance. So for example, every single good thing that happens in our lives, everything comes at a cost. There's nothing for free. Somebody with an incredible career has no relationship with their kids, right? Everything comes at a cost. But at the same time, everything we struggle with has opportunity and lesson that goes with it. It's always balanced, right? And so whenever anybody tells me this great thing, I'm always like, yeah, but at what cost? And was the cost worth it? Sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes the answer is no. And when something horrible happens in someone's life or something goes sideways, I always ask, but what did you learn? You know, I mean, my career, I mean, yours is the same. You know, the whole golden circle and the concept of why came out of me losing my passion and hating work. I went through depression. I never want to go through that again, but I'm really glad it happened because look at what it's given me an entirely new life view. And I think of strengths and weaknesses the same way. You know, I think it's hilarious when people say, what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses? Well, it depends. Life is balanced and it's always contextual. And everything that we have that's a strength has liability attached, and every weakness we have has strength that's attached. So the single greatest lesson I ever learned in my career that profoundly changed the course of my life, and it comes right before the realization and the articulation of why. I learned how to ask for help, and I learned how to accept it when it was offered, okay? And I think that it's not about giving up on someone. It's that helping someone is a team sport. Success is a team sport. And if you find that you're the only player in their life, when they should be the primary player, you can only do the assists. You'll never be the one making the baskets. That's their job, right? But if they won't take the pass, then at some point you stop throwing the ball. And it's not about giving up on people. It's about accountability to take responsibility for oneself. And giving up on somebody is, don't ever call me again. You don't take my advice. This is over, right? That's giving up on someone. I think the other way to do it is like, listen, I cannot help you if you cannot be involved to help yourself. And I will want to sit down with them, and I won't criticize and be like, you're not doing this, you have to follow my advice, you have to do this, you got to go work at Subway for the week. Like that's not what, I want to sit down and understand what the blockage is. There's something else that's the blockage that I can get to, hopefully. But at the end of the day, I will say to them point blank, listen, if you're not going to be involved in this, then there's no point to me being involved. You know, you have to, like, this is a team and I'm the only player here. And so I will always be here. And when you are ready, maybe it's just bad timing. I don't know what else is going on in your life, and maybe this is not the right time, or maybe I'm a bad fit. But when you are ready, I will still be here no matter what. But you have to call me. There's no more me throwing you the ball. Like, you're going to have to call me.
And then they call you. And then
sometimes they do, sometimes
time.
they don't. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Why?
Parents should never tell their child that it's not okay to have a negative emotion. And you know what that leads to? That leads to avoidance strategies. Feelings are temporary. No matter how discomforting it is, it's like a wave in the ocean. It comes and goes.
Why does anxiety and phobias need a separate conversation when it comes to kids than adults?
Because developmentally, it looks different in children, and oftentimes children are misdiagnosed. A lot of times, because children are growing, they have these very short periods of time in which they appear to be struggling with something, and that's actually developmentally normal. So we also don't want to pathologize these children needlessly. We don't want to make it look like everybody has a disorder because they're just going through some growing pains. And so I think that's why the separate conversation is needed, because there is a lot more sensitivity to how long they have to be suffering with something before it really does warrant some prevention.
So let's start with what life looks like for a child who has anxiety.
Particularly as a child, you need somebody to take care of all of your business. You can't support yourself. That's the way that mammals work. And as children, their attachment develops based on whether or not they feel secure when they're with their primary caregivers, when they're in their environment. Do they feel safe? And anxiety can develop when there's a very chaotic environment, when your primary caregivers aren't always consistently there to support you, especially when you fall or have a fear or have something bad happen to you. So sometimes it's environmental. And if there is structure and if there's an establishment for safety, then the child can come back from anxiety pretty easily too.
Or is it more just a predisposition that they have from birth?
Anxiety does show some predispositions. So we know that even from birth that there are differences in temperament. So for example, some babies are just harder to soothe. They're a little bit more sensitive to noises and lights and other types of sensory information. Usually that's a precursor for having a little bit more of an anxious temperament. Doesn't mean that you'll develop a full-fledged anxiety disorder, but just means that under pressure or under stress, you are more likely to develop some anxiety symptoms. Anxiety manifests in a type of a difficulty with going to school, with pretending that they're sick so that they don't have to go to school. Oftentimes there's issues with separation, so part of their not wanting to go to school isn't necessarily that they don't like school or that they are being, for example, bullied in school, but that they don't want to be apart from their primary caregivers. And so oftentimes for children, anxiety manifests in bodily symptoms. They'll say that they have headaches, they'll say that they have stomach aches and they can't go to school. And oftentimes they also complain of other types of things like being easily distracted. And so sometimes you can see how that could lead to misdiagnoses. Is it time to take them to the primary care doctor? Is it time to see if they have ADHD? But all of the time you have to make sure that you're considering that anxiety might really be the explanation for it.
So when I was young, probably between the ages of 3 and 8, when specifically my mother, when she would leave for the night and I had a babysitter, oh my gosh, you would have thought that I had been stabbed in the back. I could not believe that my mother was going to leave me. And then it was just something I grew out of. I didn't seek treatment. There was my mom just goes, well, I'm leaving. You know, you're going to eventually get over it. And I did. So, but that, I'm for a parent, how would they know if it's something they're going to get over or something that could actually be detrimental long term?
I think oftentimes for children, we look about the span of 3 to 6 months. If it doesn't go away in about that period of time, then it's time to kind of look at that a little bit more in detail and to see if there's something that needs to be done. Also, some children from a very young age do show a proclivity towards being extra conscientious. So they want things to be in their place. They want things to be organized. They're a little bit of a control freak, even as a little child. And when you see that, that also tends to correlate with anxiety symptoms as they grow.
You mentioned earlier about somebody or a child exhibiting anxious traits but not having the disorder.
Right.
What is the definition of a child under the age of 10 having anxiety disorder, or compared to just having anxious traits?
I think there's two very major things to look for. One is it clinically impairing them on a variety of tasks in their daily life? Is it impairing them at school? Is it stopping them from being able to develop good friendships? Is it hard for them to function in the home? Is it hard for them to do self-care activities like get up, get dressed, shower, put your backpack together, get on the bus? That's one area. The other area is that the individual perceives a huge amount of distress. So if they themselves say, I'm very upset about this, I'm upset by my own anxiety, I'm upset that my stomach hurts so much, I'm upset that I can't go to school, that's the other criteria for knowing that it's a disorder.
How does a 4-year-old do that?
And that's part of the problem. With children, they don't necessarily say, this is bothering me this much. So as a parent or a teacher or an adult that is in the child's life, it's kind of your responsibility to check in, to see how they're doing, to ask very specific questions. And I think with children especially, because they're not usually mature enough to spell it out with their own words, it's important to ask them very, very pointed questions about it. Because when you ask, you do get an answer.
Yes. So for a child who goes 3 or 6 months, and a child being, we're calling a child what? Anyone under the age of 10, 18?
Yeah, I guess, if we're talking about a minor, anybody under the age of 18. I guess we've been focusing a little bit more on the younger children. So
let's start there.
Yeah, let's do that.
So with the younger children, let's say under 10, they are getting out of school, talking about how anxious they are going to school, faking being sick so they can avoid it. It's been going on 3 to 6 months. What's happening on a neurological level?
So oftentimes with children, what they notice is just that they have a difficult time handling and managing their environment. So if they feel like there's too much stimuli, or that there's too much of a focus on them individually. Individuals who have anxiety sometimes don't like when other people are looking at them, paying attention to them. And so if they feel like there's too much going on in that direction, they'll oftentimes start to feel not only the bodily symptoms, but just worries, fears about what's going to happen next. And in fact, anxiety wouldn't even exist if we didn't have the ability as human beings to think into the future. Because if we're being mindful and we're just staying in the present moment, nothing's happening except that we're sitting here and having a conversation on a couch. It's when your mind races to, what do I have to still do for the rest of the day? What's going to happen when I have to give that school presentation? When I go and play on the schoolyard, am I going to get bullied again? It's when you think in the future that anxiety happens. And so children who sort of have that future forecasting ability and tend to attribute negative outcomes to the future are more likely to have anxiety.
This is really good. I like that. This is so good because it's anxiety only can occur because we have the ability to think about the future.
Yes.
Which immediately tells me a way to combat anxiety, and this is higher level, not just with kids, but for anybody. Being in the moment, being mindful, being present, however you get there, meditation, whatever.
Right.
Could be a way to treat, is a way to treat the anxiety.
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting because most children have a hard time thinking into the future because they're so present-minded. You know, the minute they don't get a toy, they're like, my world is over. They don't think that in 5 minutes they won't even want that toy anymore. But I think sometimes children who are a little bit more beyond their years that way, their brains are sort of accelerated in terms of thinking into the future and projecting. Sometimes that actually leads to anxiety. And there's been a number of studies actually looking at people who are more conscientious, more ambitious, and whether or not more anxiety occurs. And we're not talking necessarily about one that's diagnosed as a disorder, but just anxiety symptoms in general. Also, anxiety can have a very physical manifestation for people. So when people say that they're having an anxiety attack, they may mean that they are having a panic attack. It means that they're having all these physiological reactions, quickened heartbeat, heart pounding, maybe sweating, maybe just feeling like you're crawling out of your skin. So that would be just some of the examples of how anxiety can manifest in the body.
And for a child, is it the same thing?
For children, I think they don't have as many emotion words to capture how they're feeling, but they oftentimes will talk a little bit more about things hurting. So headaches and stomach aches. They sometimes will just say that they don't feel right because their vocabulary is a little bit more limited. Sometimes it's hard to know exactly what it is that's going on. But I have found that with children, oftentimes they'll talk about pains in their body.
Is a temper tantrum a panic attack for a child?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think sometimes with children who have temper tantrums, it is because they're overstimulated and they need to kind of gain control of their environment again. Other children are just having temper tantrums, maybe because they need to have limit setting, maybe because they have another type of issue like an externalizing behavioral problem, such as ADHD or oppositional defiant disorder. So it can really vary.
Are there red flags that would tell a parent, all right, stop asking questions, get this kid into a psychologist or therapist or psychiatrist ASAP?
Well, there's a couple of things that we would look for. I mean, oftentimes children who are anxious, they cry. And so if you see that they're crying multiple times a day, sometimes being set up by things that are just really at the drop of a pin, it's time to see if they need some professional intervention, especially if the teachers are already pointing it out, if they're having difficulties even just maintaining eye contact. I mean, just things that feel kind of basic but are important for our social functioning. That's another reason to go and consult with a professional. I think oftentimes when children are really anxious, because they can't really speak about it, there's so much agitation. So every once in a while you will see a child acting out. And this goes back to your earlier question about temper tantrums, that sometimes you will see that. And if it happens all the time, especially around stressful events like going to school, finishing a homework assignment, being around too many people at one time, that's another clue that perhaps it's actually anxiety and you need some professional support.
Phobias.
Phobias.
We've talked about anxiety.
Yes.
What's a phobia?
Phobia is an irrational fear against something that probably doesn't have the proclivity to harm you as much as you think it does. So it's not a phobia to be afraid of a saber-toothed tiger if you're in a cage with them. That's not a phobia. That's a very realistic fear, and you should be afraid for your life. A phobia would be being afraid of a tiny spider that is not poisonous, but you just don't like spiders. And then it makes you not even want to be in the room with them, run away, cry, right? It's irrational because they're actually not going to do anything to you.
So phobias are irrational fears.
Yes.
With children under the age of 10, what are their common phobias?
Common phobias are monsters underneath the bed, lots of monster types of phobias. They oftentimes also have phobias. Interestingly, younger children have phobias of germs. And so it almost looks like OCD. It almost looks like obsessive compulsive disorder. But again, children can grow out of that. So don't be afraid if all of a sudden your child's afraid of germs and they're young. Maybe in a few months it's going to go away.
Got it.
So objects, monsters, and I think cleanliness are three of the biggest ones.
And do you see common phobias in teenagers?
Common phobias in teenagers are sort of run the gamut a lot more. I think at that point they've had a little bit more life experience, and they actually sometimes start to develop phobias from watching other people. If they see other people be afraid of something, like their own parents, their friends, then they all of a sudden start to be afraid of the same thing.
Yeah. I see so many parents who are afraid of dogs, and then their kids who are
afraid.
5 are afraid of dogs.
Yeah.
Because they just go, this is mom and dad are scared of this, so I need to be scared of this.
Absolutely. And yet again, you look to your caregivers for how you should be navigating your life and your social world. So that doesn't surprise me at all.
So that covers the 10 and under. I would imagine it's maybe a little easier to have these conversations, maybe. With a child who's 10 to 18.
Yes.
How does anxiety manifest differently in that demographic?
I think oftentimes with the preteens and the teenagers, it manifests more sort of in like a decreased zest for life. Because they are so anxious, it actually limits their ability to go out and do new activities and meet new people and put themselves up to just the kind of new opportunities that sometimes can actually make you feel really happy and really confident about yourself. So I think with preteens and teens, you see them kind of isolating themselves.
But I'm not a parent, but don't all preteens and teens isolate themselves? I feel like they all go home, lock themselves in the room, listen to music, like, leave me alone. Like, that's just what they do.
I think mostly, that's a really good point. I think mostly it's about friendships. If they're isolating themselves from their peers, who they're supposed to want the love and support of the most at that age, that's when you know something's going on.
That's important to note.
Yes, definitely. As a parent, yes. I mean, that they want to go and lock themselves in their rooms and talk to their girlfriends, that's not really as much of an issue. But if they're locking themselves in their room, not talking to anybody, and at school, they're isolating, that's a big issue. We oftentimes also see that their grades start to drop. Again, they lose motivation for what they used to like doing, so they stop participating in extracurricular activities and they stop working in school. And that's another thing to look for in those preteen to teenage ranges.
Why is it so important to watch this series?
I think it's important because anxiety is such a big problem, and it's a big problem that a lot of times people don't talk about, or they throw it around very flippantly, like, I'm just anxious. Well, are you serious about that? Is it actually impairing your life? And if it is, we need to do something about it. And with children, because they don't have that developed vocabulary, it can impact their life in so many significant ways, and yet they can't talk about it. And that's why it's so important as parents, as caring adults, to know the signs of anxiety and to know that it's not something else. Sometimes people think it's ADHD. Sometimes people think that there's a medical condition. It's not. It might be anxiety. So make sure you know the signs and be able to delineate that for yourself.